William Petto stood at the edge of the opulent wedding reception, his grey eyes scanning the crowd like a predator sensing danger. The Grandview Estates ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the laughter of Chicago's elite, but all he could focus on was the approaching tempest in designer heels, Brinley Madison, his ex-fiancée, cutting through the crowd with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. 3 years. 3 years since he'd discovered her betrayal, since he'd learned that the woman he'd planned to marry had been feeding his business secrets to her father, his biggest rival. 3 years since he'd built walls around his heart, so fortress high that even he couldn't scale them anymore. "William!" Brinley's voice carried across the marble floor, sugar-sweet and venomous. Behind her, her parents followed like generals preparing for war. Braden Madison's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man who'd orchestrated this entire encounter. Panic, an emotion William Petto never allowed himself to feel, clawed at his chest. He couldn't face them. Not tonight. Not when the merger with Harrison Tech hung in the balance. Not when one scandal could destroy everything he'd built from the ashes of his mother's unfulfilled dreams. His gaze darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape route when they landed on her. She was crouched beside the fountain in the corner, adjusting her camera lens with the focused intensity of an artist lost in her craft. Her dark skin glowed under the soft lighting, and her natural hair was swept up in an elegant twist that showcased the graceful curve of her neck. She wore a simple black dress that spoke of someone who understood elegance didn't require a designer label, and when she looked up from her camera to capture a candid moment between the bride and groom, her smile was so genuine it literally stopped William's breath. Without thinking, without planning, without any of the calculated precision that ruled his life, William Petto, billionaire CEO, master of the universe, found himself walking toward a complete stranger. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rougher than intended. She looked up, and he was struck by the warmth in her dark brown eyes that held intelligence, humor, and a wariness that suggested she'd learned not to trust easily. "I know this is going to sound insane, but I need you to be my girlfriend for the next 5 minutes." Joanne Jarmer blinked, certain she'd misheard. The man standing before her was devastatingly handsome in the way that made smart women do stupid things. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it, and eyes the color of storm clouds threatening rain. His tuxedo probably cost more than her rent, and everything about him screamed money and power. But there was something else there too, a vulnerability so raw and desperate that it caught her completely off guard. "I'm sorry, what?" she managed, her camera still halfway to her eye. 5 minutes, he repeated, his voice urgent now. "I'll pay you $10,000 to pretend to be my girlfriend for 5 minutes. I know how that sounds, but I'm not crazy, I'm not dangerous, and I'm definitely not propositioning you. He glanced over his shoulder, and Joanne followed his gaze to see a stunning blonde woman in a dress that probably cost more than Joanne's car, bearing down on them with the determination of a woman on a mission. "Please," he said, and the word was so quiet, so desperate, that it bypassed every logical thought in Joanne's head and went straight to her heart. Joanne Jarmer had always been a sucker for wounded creatures, abandoned cats, injured birds, broken people. It was what her brother Hudson called her fatal flaw. Looking into this stranger's eyes, seeing the genuine panic there, she recognized another wounded soul. But more than that, she saw something that made her hesitate. This wasn't some entitled rich boy used to buying his way out of problems. This was a man who'd been cornered, who was asking for help in the only way he knew how. $10,000, she whispered, her mind racing. That money could cover her rent for 6 months, could pay for the new camera equipment she desperately needed, could give her the financial breathing room she'd been praying for. Cash, tonight, I swear on my mother's grave. The mention of his mother, The reverence in his voice when he said it sealed the deal. Joanne had lost her own mother 5 years ago, and she recognized that particular brand of grief, the kind that made you invoke the dead when you needed people to believe you were telling the truth. "What's my name?" she asked quickly, her photographer's eye already assessing the approaching threat. "What? If I'm your girlfriend, what's my name?" He looked panicked for a split second, then his eyes dropped to the camera strap around her neck where her business card was tucked. "Joanne," he said. "Joanne Jarmer." "And you are?" William Petto." She knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. Petto Industries, tech mogul, youngest billionaire in the city. What the hell was she getting herself into? But before she could change her mind, before rational thought could override the impulse that had already made her decision, she found herself nodding. "Joanne, darling," William said, his voice suddenly warm and intimate as the blonde woman approached. His hand found hers, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with the man. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the desperate man who'd approached her moments before. In his place stood someone completely in control, radiating confidence and barely contained power. But his hand was trembling slightly in hers, and Joanne realized that the control was a performance, one he'd perfected over years of necessity. "William." The blonde woman's voice could have frozen champagne. She was beautiful in that untouchable way that spoke of expensive everything, surgery, clothes, jewelry, but her eyes were cold as winter, calculating as a shark's. "I didn't know you were seeing anyone." "Brinley." William's voice was carefully neutral, but Joanne felt the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared like he was preparing for battle. "I'd like you to meet my girlfriend, Joanne Jarmer. Joanne, this is Brinley Madison." Whatever history these two shared, it wasn't pretty. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Girlfriend?" Brinley's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "How unexpected. I don't recall seeing anything about this in the society pages." There was an insult buried in there somewhere, Joanne realized. The implication that someone like her wouldn't rate a mention in the society pages. The assumption that William would only date women who did. The subtle suggestion that she didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. Instead of being intimidated, Joanne felt her spine stiffen. She'd spent her entire career fighting to be taken seriously, to prove that her work had value regardless of her background. She wasn't about to let some entitled socialite make her feel small. "We prefer to keep our relationship private," Joanne heard herself saying, stepping closer to William and letting her voice carry just a hint of possessiveness. "Some things are too precious to share with the world, don't you think? Too real to turn into performance." William's hand tightened around hers, and she could feel his surprise at her response, followed quickly by something that felt like admiration. "How long have you been together?" Brinley pressed, her smile sharp as a blade, her eyes narrowing as she assessed this unexpected obstacle. 6 months, William and Joanne said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. For a moment, a real smile flickered across William's face. Not the polished version he wore in business, but something genuine and warm. 6 wonderful months, Joanne added, reaching up to touch William's face with her free hand. His skin was warm under her palm, slightly rough with 5 o'clock shadow, and she felt him lean almost imperceptibly into her touch. "Time flies when you're falling in love." The words were meant to be part of the act, but as they left her lips, Joanne realized they didn't feel like acting. There was something about this man, something beyond his obvious wealth and power, that called to her, something vulnerable and real beneath all that careful control. "Falling in love," Brinley repeated, her voice flat as roadkill. "How romantic." Well, I should let you get back to whatever it is you're doing. Taking pictures of the wedding, Joanne said smoothly. I'm a photographer. Of course you are. The dismissal in Brinley's voice was clear, the implications obvious. Of course the help would catch William's attention. Of course he'd be slumming it with someone so far beneath his usual standards. Well, enjoy your evening. She glided away, but not before Joanne caught the fury in her eyes, the promise of retribution that sent a chill down her spine. Whatever she'd wanted from William, she hadn't gotten it. And somehow, Joanne knew this wouldn't be the end of it. Thank you, William said quietly, his hand still holding hers, his thumb absently stroking across her knuckles. I owe you more than $10,000. Just $10,000 will be fine, Joanne said, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing, the way his simple touch was making her feel things she had no business feeling for a man she'd known for exactly 7 minutes. Though I have to ask, what was that about? William was quiet for a long moment, watching Brinley disappear into the crowd, his expression unreadable. Ancient history that refuses to stay buried. There was a story there, Joanne realized. A painful one, judging by the shadows that crossed his face, the way his jaw tightened with old hurt. Are you okay? She asked softly, and the genuine concern in her voice seemed to surprise him. He looked down at her, and for a moment his carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. She saw loneliness there, and pain, and a bone-deep weariness that spoke of someone who'd been fighting battles for far too long. But she also saw something else, a flicker of hope, as if her simple question had reminded him that there were still people in the world who asked such things without ulterior motives. I am now, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her breath catch in her throat. They stood there for a moment, hands still clasped, surrounded by the laughter and music of the wedding, but somehow separate from it all. Joanne was acutely aware of everything about him, the way he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely masculine, the way his thumb was still stroking across her knuckles like he didn't realize he was doing it, the way he was looking at her like she was the most fascinating thing he'd ever encountered. Your 5 minutes are up, she said finally, though she made no move to pull her hand away from his. Are they? He asked, his voice low and intimate, like they were sharing secrets instead of standing in a room full of people. Because I find myself hoping you might extend my contract. The way he said it, like he was talking about something far more significant than a fake relationship at a wedding, made her pulse skip and dance. Mr. Petto, she said carefully, I think you should know that I don't usually agree to pretend to be someone's girlfriend for money. What made you agree tonight? She studied his face, seeing past the wealth and power to the man underneath, the one who'd been desperate enough to approach a stranger, vulnerable enough to ask for help, honest enough to mention his mother's grave. You looked like you needed saving. He was quiet for so long that she wondered if she'd said something wrong. Then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made her understand why women probably threw themselves at him regularly. You have no idea how right you are about that, Joanne Jarmer. Chapter 2. The Art of Pretending. The most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like truth, and the most beautiful truths are the ones that start as lies. 58 minutes later, Joanne realized she had completely forgotten about her camera. It hung around her neck like forgotten jewelry, while she found herself completely captivated by the man who was supposed to be paying her to pretend to care about him. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was getting paid $10,000 to fake interest in someone who was genuinely the most fascinating person she'd met in years. You're telling me you learned to speak Mandarin just to negotiate a single deal? She asked, her laughter genuine as they stood by the ornate windows overlooking the estate's gardens. The fake relationship had somehow evolved into real conversation, and she was helpless to stop it. William's smile was softer now, more authentic than the polished version he'd worn when facing Brinley. My grandmother always said that speaking someone's language is the first step to understanding their heart. In business, that translates to better deals. In life, ... he shrugged. But there was something deeper in his expression. In life, it means you stop making assumptions about people. Your grandmother sounds wise. She is. Adeline Petto, 93 years old and sharper than most people half her age. She's the only person who can still tell me what to do and get away with it. His voice held genuine affection, and Joanne found herself wanting to know more about this woman who could command the respect of a billionaire. She raised you? The question slipped out before Joanne could stop it. Too personal for their fake relationship, too intimate for someone she'd known for less than an hour. But William didn't seem to mind the boundary crossing. After my mother died, yes. I was 15. His jaw tightened slightly, and she watched him retreat just a little behind his walls. My father wasn't equipped for single parenthood. There was a story there, painted in the careful way he chose his words. Joanne recognized the language of someone who'd learned early not to expect too much from the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally. She knew that language because she spoke it too. I'm sorry, she said softly, losing a parent that young. There's no preparing for that kind of loss. You speak like someone who knows. My mother died 5 years ago. Cancer. The word still tasted bitter on her tongue, still felt like failure even though she knew better. I was 23. Thought I was so grown up. Turns out there's no age when losing your mother doesn't turn your world upside down. William's hand found hers again, the contact as natural as breathing despite everything artificial about their situation. No, there isn't. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two strangers connected by shared loss and an inexplicable magnetism that seemed to intensify with every passing minute. Around them, the wedding continued, laughter and music and celebration, but they existed in a bubble of unexpected intimacy. I should be working, Joanne said finally, though she made no move to pick up her camera or step away from him. The bride and groom have been making eyes at each other for the past hour, William observed, glancing toward the couple who were indeed lost in their own world. I think you could disappear for the rest of the night and still have enough material for a photo album. Spoken like someone who's never worried about paying rent. The words came out sharper than she intended, and she immediately regretted them. But William didn't look offended. If anything, he looked thoughtful. You're right, he said simply. I haven't worried about money in a very long time. But I remember what it felt like to watch my mother choosing between groceries and art supplies, telling herself that her dreams could wait another week, another month, another year. The pain in his voice was so raw, so unexpected, that Joanne felt tears prick her eyes. She was an artist. Painter. Brilliant, passionate, completely devoted to her craft, and completely unable to make a living from it. His grip on her hand tightened unconsciously. She died believing she was a failure. I've spent the last 20 years making sure other artists don't have to make the same choice she did. Before Joanne could respond, could process the depth of vulnerability he'd just shared with her, a familiar voice cut through the moment like a blade through silk. Well, the happy couple is still inseparable, I see. Brinley was back, and this time she wasn't alone. 2 other women flanked her. One Joanne recognized as the mayor's wife, the other as a prominent socialite whose picture was always in the Chicago Tribune's society section. They moved like a pack, these women, united in their shared sense of superiority. Brinley, William said, his voice immediately cooling several degrees, his body language shifting subtly to something more protective. Ladies, We were just discussing the most interesting rumor, Brinley continued, her smile predatory as a shark's, about how you've been hiding this relationship for 6 months. It's fascinating, really, how someone can fly so completely under the radar in a city like Chicago. The implication was clear as crystal. Joanne didn't belong in William's world, and everyone knew it. She was an outsider, an interloper, someone playing dress-up in a game she'd never be equipped to win. "Some of us prefer substance over spectacle," Joanne said smoothly, stepping closer to William and letting her voice carry just enough steel to make her point. "We find our relationship is more meaningful when it's not performed for an audience's entertainment." The mayor's wife laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd found something amusing to mock. "How refreshing. Though I have to say, I'm curious about your work, dear. Photography, wasn't it? Do you do weddings often?" The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. They were treating her like hired help, which technically Joanne supposed she was tonight. But she'd be damned if she'd let them make her feel ashamed of honest work. "Actually," she said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest, "I specialize in fine art photography. I have a show opening next month at the Morrison Gallery. Portraits of Chicago's essential workers during the pandemic. People who kept this city running while others hid in their penthouses, ordering groceries online and complaining about being bored." William squeezed her hand, and she could feel his approval radiating from him like heat. "How charitable," the socialite said, with a tight smile that didn't reach her surgically enhanced eyes. "I prefer human," Joanne replied sweetly. "But then again, I suppose we all value different things. Some of us value people for what they contribute to the world, rather than what they inherit from it." Brinley's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Indeed we do. Some of us value loyalty, for instance, the kind that comes from shared experiences, shared history." Her gaze flicked meaningfully to William, and Joanne felt him tense beside her. The kind that doesn't evaporate the moment something more interesting comes along. The barb hit its mark. Joanne could feel William's reaction, the way his jaw clenched, the slight intake of breath that suggested Brinley had touched on something that still had the power to hurt. Whatever she was referring to, it cut deep. "You know what I value," Joanne said, her voice soft but carrying clearly in the sudden silence around them. She turned to look directly at William, speaking to him as much as to their audience. "I value a man who treats people with kindness regardless of their bank account, who speaks about his mother with reverence and his grandmother with love, who learns languages not just to make money, but to understand hearts." She looked directly at Brinley. "I value authenticity over performance, substance over spectacle, love over leverage." The last words were aimed squarely at Brinley, and from the way the other woman's face flushed with rage, they hit their target dead center. "How poetic," Brinley said through gritted teeth. "William always did appreciate creative types." The way she said it made creativity sound like a communicable disease. "Ladies," William said, his voice cutting through the tension like ice, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I believe my girlfriend and I were having a private conversation." It was a dismissal, polite but unmistakable. The three women had no choice but to retreat, but Brinley lingered for just a moment, her eyes promising that this wasn't over. "Enjoy your evening, William," she said, her voice honey-sweet again but with venom underneath. "I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other soon." As they walked away, Joanne felt the adrenaline drain from her body, leaving her slightly shaky. She'd just gone to war with Chicago society on behalf of a man she'd known for barely an hour, and the realization of what she'd done was starting to sink in. "I'm sorry," William said immediately, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "They had no right to treat you that way." "I can handle a few entitled rich women," Joanne said, though her voice wasn't quite steady. But what did she mean about seeing more of each other? And what was that about loyalty and shared history? William was quiet for a long moment, his eyes following Brinley's retreating figure with an expression Joanne couldn't quite read. "Brinley and I were engaged 3 years ago," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him something. "It ended badly. As for seeing more of each other—" He sighed, suddenly looking older, more tired. "Our companies are involved in some complicated business dealings. It's not easy to avoid someone when your livelihoods are tangled together like fishing line." There was more to the story, Joanne realized. Much more. The kind of hurt that left scars, the kind of betrayal that made a man desperate enough to pay a stranger to pretend to love him rather than face his demons alone. But before she could ask, the wedding coordinator approached them with professional urgency. "Excuse me, miss? The bride would like some final photos with the family." Reality crashed back over Joanne like a wave of ice water. She was here to work, not to play dress-up with a billionaire. This wasn't real, no matter how much it felt like it, no matter how much she wanted it to be. "Of course," she said, finally reaching for her camera with hands that weren't quite steady. This was fun, but I need to get back to work." "Joanne," William said, catching her arm gently, his touch sending electricity up her spine. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night." The request caught her completely off guard. "What? Dinner? A real dinner, not a fake girlfriend arrangement, just you and me getting to know each other without an audience or ulterior motives?" For a moment, she was tempted. More than tempted. The last hour had been magical in a way she hadn't experienced in years, but reality was a harsh mistress, and she'd learned long ago not to trust fairy tales, especially ones that started with financial transactions. "I can't," she said quietly. "Why not?" She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the designer tuxedo, the confidence that came from never having to worry about money, the easy assumption that she would say yes because men like him were used to getting what they wanted. The evening had been intoxicating, but now, in the harsh light of reality, she could see it for what it truly was. "Because this isn't real," she said finally, each word carefully chosen, precisely aimed. "This has been lovely, truly. You're charming and fascinating and you make me laugh. But at the end of the day, you're just another rich man playing games, and I'm just the help who was convenient for the evening." The words hurt to say, but they needed to be said, for both of their sakes. She'd seen this movie before. Wealthy man, working-class woman, temporary fascination that ended with her heart in pieces and him moving on to someone more suitable. William looked like she'd physically struck him. Joanne, that's not what this is." "Isn't it?" She smiled sadly, already backing away, already protecting herself from the inevitable disappointment. "You offered me $10,000 to pretend to be your girlfriend. I pretended. Now it's over. That's exactly what this is." She started to walk away, but his voice stopped her, desperate, raw, completely stripped of pretense. "You're wrong about me." She turned back, seeing something desperate and vulnerable in his expression that made her chest ache. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I can't afford to find out." This time, when she walked away, he didn't try to stop her. But she could feel his eyes on her for the rest of the evening, and when she left the Grandview estate 3 hours later, $10,000 richer and infinitely more confused, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The money would pay her bills, but would it be worth the cost of never knowing what might have been? Chapter 3. Canvas of Contradictions. Obsession begins the moment someone becomes impossible to forget, and William Petto had never been a man who forgot anything that mattered. 5 days since the wedding, and William had thought about Joanne Jarmer constantly. He'd calculated it during a board meeting when he should have been focusing on quarterly projections. Instead, he'd found himself remembering the way she'd laughed, the fire in her eyes when she'd defended him against Brinley's attacks, the devastating honesty when she'd called him just another rich man playing games. She was wrong about him. She had to be, which was why he was sitting in his Bentley outside a small art space in Lincoln Park at 9 a.m., reading an article about Joanne Jarmer that Grayson had found. Local photographer shines light on unsung heroes, read the headline. The article showed Joanne standing next to one of her portraits, a hospital janitor whose face radiated quiet dignity despite exhausted eyes. "I wanted to capture the humanity that kept our city alive when the world stopped," Joanne was quoted saying. "These aren't just essential workers, they're essential humans. They deserve to be seen." William studied the photograph intensely. Joanne's work was extraordinary, not just technically, but emotionally. She didn't just take pictures, she revealed souls. The Morrison Gallery was small, tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore, displaying 3 of Joanne's portraits. William had been staring at them for 20 minutes, nervous about going inside. His phone buzzed, a text from his grandmother. "Stop overthinking and go inside before that poor girl calls the police." William looked around, confused, then spotted Adeline Petto sitting on a bench across the street, waving with barely concealed amusement. At 93, she was still the most formidable woman he knew. Resigned, he got out of the car. The interior was smaller than it looked from the street, but the impact of Joanne's work was immediate. Faces stared back at him: a grocery store clerk, a bus driver, a postal worker, a teacher conducting classes over Zoom. Each portrait captured not just appearance, but essence. "Can I help you?" William turned to find a woman in her 50s with sharp, assessing eyes. This had to be Emerson Blake, the owner. "I'm interested in the Jarmer collection," he said. "Excellent choice. Are you looking for anything particular?" William's eyes were drawn to a portrait of an elderly woman in a hospital room, hands clasped in prayer. The caption read, "Ruth, ICU chaplain, 47 years of service." "That one," he said, "and that one." He pointed to Miguel's portrait. "And the teacher." Emerson's eyebrows rose. "Those are our most expensive pieces. Price isn't a concern." "Actually," a familiar voice said from behind him, "I'm afraid those pieces aren't for sale anymore." William turned, his heart stopping as he saw Joanne walking toward them, her camera bag slung over her shoulder and her expression somewhere between shocked and furious. She moved with purpose, like a lioness protecting her cubs, and William felt his breath catch at the sight of her. "Joanne," Emerson said, clearly confused. "What do you mean they're not for sale?" "I mean exactly what I said." Joanne's eyes never left William's face, and he could see the hurt there, the sense of betrayal. "Those 3 pieces are being withdrawn from the sale." "But it's fine, Emerson. I'll cover any lost commission." Still staring at William, Joanne added, "I need to speak with this gentleman privately." Emerson looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand, then diplomatically retreated to her office with the wisdom of someone who'd learned when to make herself scarce. "Are you stalking me, Mr. Petto?" Joanne asked, her voice deadly quiet. "No, I'm trying to buy your art." "Why?" The simple question hung between them like a challenge. William could have lied, could have said he was an art collector or that he'd heard about her work through mutual friends. Instead, he found himself telling the truth, stripped of pretense or calculation. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you." Joanne blinked, clearly not expecting his honesty. "So you decided to, what, buy my photographs?" "I decided to see your work. The buying was secondary." He gestured toward the walls around them. "I wanted to understand the woman who could see through all the bullshit at that wedding." Who could look at me and know exactly who I was underneath everything else? Something flickered in Joanne's eyes, but her stance remained defensive. That doesn't give you the right to follow me. You're right. It doesn't. William ran a hand through his hair, that tell of nervousness she was beginning to recognize. I'm not handling this well. I'm not used to this. This? Not being able to forget someone. The admission cost him something, and she could see it in the vulnerability that crossed his face. Not being able to go 5 minutes without wondering what you're doing, what you're thinking, whether you meant what you said about me being just another rich man playing games. The raw honesty in his voice made her carefully constructed walls waver dangerously. Mr. Petto, William, please. The way he said it, like her using his first name, mattered more than any business deal, made her chest tighten. William. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her heart race. What do you want from me? It was a loaded question, and they both knew it. William stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of blue in his storm-colored eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. I want to know why you became a photographer. I want to know what made you choose to capture essential workers instead of fashion models or celebrities. I want to know what books you read and what music you listen to and whether you prefer coffee or tea. He paused, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. I want to know everything about the woman who called me out for being just another rich man playing games and then proved she was brave enough to defend someone she barely knew. And what if that's exactly what you are? Then prove it. The challenge in his voice surprised her. What? Prove that I'm just another rich man playing games. Spend time with me. Get to know me. If after that you still think I'm exactly what you expect me to be, I'll walk away and never bother you again. Joanne stared at him, seeing the determination in his face, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide beneath his challenge. And if you prove me wrong, then maybe you'll let me take you to dinner like I asked 5 days ago. This is insane. Completely. I don't even like you. I don't believe that. His smile was soft, knowing, completely confident in a way that should have been arrogant, but somehow wasn't. I think you're terrified of liking me. He was right, and that terrified her more than anything else. She didn't just like him, she was fascinated by him in a way that felt dangerous to her carefully ordered life. But looking at her photographs on these walls, at the work she'd created to show the world that everyone deserved to be seen, she realized she was being a hypocrite. How could she ask the world to look beyond surfaces when she was doing exactly the opposite? One coffee, she heard herself saying. One coffee and then you answer any questions I ask honestly. Deal. I mean any questions, William. Where you grew up, why you and Brinley broke up, what happened to your mother, why a billionaire tech mogul knows so much about art, everything. Something flickered across his face, fear maybe, or pain. She was asking him to strip himself bare, to trust her with truths he probably hadn't shared with anyone. But he nodded without hesitation. Everything. They ended up at the coffee shop next door, sitting by the window where they could see people walking past on the street. William ordered black coffee. Joanne got a caramel latte with extra foam. The morning rush had passed, leaving them essentially alone, except for a few laptop-wielding writers in the corner. So, she said, settling back in her chair and studying his face, tell me about your mother. William was quiet for so long that Joanne wondered if he was going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, each word chosen with precision. Her name was Isabella. She was 22 when she had me, unmarried, mixed race in a time and place where that made life complicated. He stared into his coffee like it held answers. My father was from a wealthy white family. When his parents found out about the pregnancy, they offered my mother money to disappear. Did she take it? Some of it. Enough to get by while she was pregnant. She had this idea that once I was born, once I was real to him, he'd change his mind about us. William's laugh was bitter, hollow. She was young and in love and believed in fairy tales. What happened? He married someone else 6 months after I was born. Someone appropriate. Someone his family approved of. William's jaw clenched. My mother raised me alone until I was 8, and then he died in a car accident and left me everything in his will. Guilt, I suppose. Joanne felt her chest tighten. That must have been devastating for your mother. It should have been a blessing. Suddenly we had money, security, a future. But my father's family contested the will. They spent 2 years dragging my mother through court, claiming she'd manipulated him, that I wasn't really his son. William's voice grew rougher. They eventually lost, but the legal fees and the stress, the constant attacks on her character, the implication that she was just a gold digger who'd trapped their son, it broke something in her. She started drinking, started believing what they said about her. William, she died when I was 15, pills and alcohol. The coroner called it accidental, but I knew better. He finally looked up, and the pain in his eyes made Joanne's breath catch. She died believing she was exactly what his family said she was, a gold-digging mistake who'd ruined everyone's life. Tears pricked Joanne's eyes. I'm so sorry. I swore that day that I'd never let anyone make me feel powerless again. Money became my armor, success became my weapon, and I told myself that if I never needed anyone, no one could hurt me the way they hurt her. Until Brinley, William nodded grimly. Until Brinley, I thought I'd found someone who understood that world, who could navigate it without getting destroyed by it. I was wrong. What did she do? She spent 2 years learning everything about my business, my deals, my strategies, fed it all to her father, who used the information to systematically undercut every major contract I bid on. William's voice was flat, emotionless. I found out 3 weeks before our wedding, when one of her emails was accidentally forwarded to me instead of him. Joanne felt sick. William, that's horrible. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that she was right about me. I had become exactly what I swore I wouldn't. Someone who put money and power above everything else. Someone who didn't know how to love without leverage. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession settling between them like a bridge built of shared understanding. Is that why you offered me $10,000? Joanne asked quietly. Because you don't know how to connect with people without using money? William considered the question seriously. Maybe, probably. He looked at her directly. But when I asked you to dinner afterward, that wasn't about money. That was about you. What about me? You saw through everything, the money, the power, the performance. You saw me, and you still chose to defend me against Brinley. No one had done that for me since my mother died. Joanne felt her walls crumbling despite every instinct telling her to run. William, I know I'm damaged goods, Joanne. I know I have trust issues and control issues and probably a dozen other problems you don't want to deal with. But I also know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you for 5 days, and I've never experienced anything like that before. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he was showing her, was overwhelming. This wasn't the calculated billionaire from the wedding. This was just a man who'd been hurt and was trying to figure out how to trust again. What are you asking from me? She said finally. Time, patience, a chance to prove that I can be the man you made me want to be when you looked at me that night. Joanne stared at him, seeing past the expensive clothes and cultivated power to the scared boy who'd lost his mother. The man who'd been betrayed by the woman he'd planned to marry, the person who'd spent so many years protecting himself that he'd forgotten how to let anyone in. One dinner, she heard herself saying. One real dinner, where we talk about normal things like favorite movies and childhood pets and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. William's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Does it? Absolutely not. And if you say yes, this ends before it starts. Then it's a good thing I'm a purist when it comes to pizza. Despite everything, despite all her reservations and fears, Joanne found herself smiling back. One dinner, William Petto. Don't make me regret this. I won't, he said, and the promise in his voice made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she was about to discover that fairy tales could happen to girls like her after all. Chapter 4. Walls Built to Crumble. The most dangerous thing about falling in love isn't the fall, it's the moment you realize you don't want to be caught by anyone else. Joanne had always prided herself on being practical. She bought generic brands at the grocery store, drove a 10-year-old Honda that she maintained herself, and had never owned a piece of clothing that couldn't be washed in a regular machine. So when William texted her the address for their dinner and she found herself standing outside Alinea, the most exclusive restaurant in Chicago, she seriously considered turning around and going home. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she thought, staring at the understated elegance of the building. He's trying to impress me with money. Her phone buzzed. I know what you're thinking. Trust me for 2 hours. She looked up to find William standing in the doorway, wearing dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt instead of his usual designer armor. He looked younger somehow, more approachable, and when he smiled at her, it wasn't the polished businessman smile she'd seen at the wedding. This was something real, nervous, hopeful. Before you say anything, he said, walking toward her with his hands slightly raised in surrender, I know this looks like exactly the kind of flashy gesture you accuse me of, but I have a confession to make. I'm listening. I've never actually eaten here. I've been invited dozens of times for business dinners, but I always declined because... He ran his hand through his hair, that nervous gesture she was coming to recognize as completely genuine, because it felt like something my father would have done. All show, no substance. Joanne studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but found only genuine nervousness and something that looked like vulnerability. Then why tonight? Because you said you wanted normal conversation about favorite movies and childhood pets. And because the chef here, David Chen, was one of my mother's closest friends. She used to bring me here when it was just a tiny storefront restaurant before it became famous. He's been asking me to come back for years. The explanation caught her completely off guard. This wasn't about impressing her with expensive food. It was about sharing something personal, something that mattered to him in ways that had nothing to do with money or status. Your mother brought you here? Every year on my birthday until she died, David used to make me a special dessert, chocolate soufflé with raspberry sauce. She'd tell him it was because I was her sweet boy, and he'd roll his eyes and pretend to be annoyed. But he always made it flawlessly. William's voice grew soft with memory. I haven't had chocolate soufflé since she died. Joanne felt her heart clench. William. I called David yesterday and told him I was bringing someone special. He's excited to meet you. William stepped closer, and she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she might reject this offering of trust. But if this makes you uncomfortable, we can go somewhere else. There's a great pizza place around the corner where we can argue about pineapple toppings. The fact that he was willing to change plans, to give up something that was clearly meaningful to him, told Joanne everything she needed to know about his intentions. I'd love to meet your mother's friend, she said softly. William's smile was radiant. Really? Really? But I'm warning you, if you try to order my food for me or do any other controlling rich guy nonsense, I'm walking out. Noted. Though I should mention that David doesn't exactly have a menu. He cooks whatever inspires him based on the people he's cooking for. Then I guess we're both taking a leap of faith. The interior of Alinea felt more like being invited into someone's beautiful home than dining in a pretentious restaurant. David Chen himself greeted them at the door, a small man in his 60s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "William," he said, pulling the much taller man into a fierce hug. "You look just like Isabella when you smile like that." "Hi, David. This is Joanne Jarmer. Joanne, this is David Chen, the best chef in Chicago and the man who taught me that food is love made edible." David turned his attention to Joanne, studying her with an artist's intensity. "Photographer," he said after a moment. "You see the world in frames, in moments captured. How did you—" "Your hands," David said simply. "The callus on your index finger from your camera strap. And William doesn't bring just anyone to meet me." As David led them to a small table by the window, Joanne found herself relaxing in spite of her reservations. This wasn't about impressing her with exclusivity. It was about sharing a piece of William's history, letting her see the boy he'd been through the eyes of someone who'd loved his mother. "So," she said once they were seated, "childhood pets. You promised me normal conversation." William laughed, and the sound was lighter than anything she'd heard from him before. "You're not going to let me ease into this, are you?" "Absolutely not. Childhood pets, William Petto, spill." "Okay, but you're going to laugh." He took a sip of water, gathering courage like he was about to confess to a crime. "I had a goldfish named Warren Buffett." Joanne nearly choked on her wine. "You named your goldfish after a billionaire investor." "I was 8 and obsessed with the idea of making money so my mother wouldn't have to work 3 jobs. I thought if I named my pet after a successful businessman, some of that success would rub off on me." "That's actually kind of heartbreaking." "It gets worse. Warren Buffett the goldfish lived for 6 years. Practically ancient for a goldfish. I was convinced it was because of his entrepreneurial name." William grinned sheepishly. "I gave business advice to a fish, Joanne. I told him about market trends and investment strategies. What did he tell you back?" "That diversification is key, and that you should never invest in anything you don't understand. He was a very wise fish." Joanne was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. "I can't believe you just told me that story. Your turn, and please tell me you had a more normal pet than a business-savvy goldfish." "I had a cat named Frida Kahlo." "After the artist?" "After the artist. She was this tiny black kitten that showed up at our apartment when I was 12, half-starved and missing part of her tail. My mother wanted to take her to the shelter, but I begged to keep her." Joanne smiled at the memory. "I named her Frida because she was beautiful despite her imperfections, and because she had this fierce independence that reminded me of Carlo's self-portraits." "What happened to her?" "She lived to be 19, spoiled and imperious until the very end. She died 2 months after my mother did, like she was waiting to make sure I could handle being alone." William reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture so natural it felt like breathing. "I'm sorry. Losing them both so close together must have been devastating." "It was. But it also taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive losing the things I loved most." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. William understood that she wasn't just talking about pets and parents. She was talking about her fear of letting herself care about him, her terror of loving someone else she might lose. David appeared at their table with the first course, something that looked like art on a plate, delicate and beautiful enough to photograph. "For the photographer," he said, setting the creation in front of Joanne, "beauty that reveals itself slowly, like developing a photograph in the darkroom." For William, he presented something entirely different, rustic, comforting, rich with memories. For the boy who still misses his mother's cooking, comfort made elegant. As they ate, the conversation flowed as easily as the wine. They talked about books. William was obsessed with biographies. Joanne loved magical realism. Movies, they both cried during animated films. And travel. William had been everywhere for business but had seen nothing. Joanne dreamed of photographing the Northern Lights. "What's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?" William asked as David brought out the third course. Joanne considered the question seriously. "My mother's hands while she was painting. She had these long, elegant fingers, and when she held a brush, it was like watching magic happen. She could create entire worlds with just color and canvas. She was an artist too. Watercolors, mostly. Landscapes and flowers. Nothing groundbreaking but beautiful in its simplicity." Joanne's voice grew wistful. She stopped painting when she got sick. Said she couldn't see the point when she wouldn't be around to finish anything. "Do you still have any of her work?" "One piece. A painting of the lake at sunrise that she did the summer before she died. It hangs in my bedroom." She looked at him curiously. "What about you? Most beautiful thing you've ever seen?" William was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You defending me to Brinley at the wedding. I've had people fight battles for me before, lawyers, business partners, employees, but no one had ever stood up for me just because they thought I deserved it." The intensity in his voice made her heart race. "William, I know this is moving fast. I know you have every reason not to trust me, but I need you to know that this," he gestured between them, "isn't a game to me. You're not a game to me." Before Joanne could respond, David appeared with dessert, a chocolate soufflé with raspberry sauce, exactly as William had described. The presentation was exquisite, but more important was the love that had gone into creating it. "For the sweet boy," David said with a wink, "and for the woman who brought his smile back." As William took his first bite, Joanne watched his face transform. For just a moment, she could see the boy he'd been, before loss and betrayal had taught him to armor his heart with money and power, before he'd learned that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. "It tastes exactly the same," he said quietly, and there were tears in his eyes. "Like coming home." "Tell me about her," Joanne said softly. "Tell me about your mother." William set down his spoon, and when he spoke, his voice was full of love and loss and memories that had been carefully preserved like treasures in a vault. She was fierce, tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but she could stare down anyone who threatened the people she loved. She believed in magic, in the power of art to change the world. She used to say that every painting was a prayer, every brushstroke an act of faith. She sounds wonderful. She was. She was also stubborn and proud and too trusting for her own good. She believed the best of people even when they showed her their worst. He looked directly at Joanne. "You would have liked her. She would have loved your work, your passion for showing the world that everyone has value. I wish I could have met her. She would have taken one look at you and started planning our wedding." The words slipped out before William could stop them, and he immediately flushed. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous?" Joanne's voice was teasing, but her eyes were serious. "Hopeful," he corrected quietly. They finished dessert in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts but somehow more connected than before. When David brought the check, William handed him a credit card, but David waved him away. "Tonight was my gift," the older man said firmly. "Isabella would want this." Outside the restaurant, they walked slowly toward Joanne's car, neither ready for the evening to end. "This wasn't what I expected," Joanne admitted. "What did you expect? Pretension, show-off wealth, a man trying to buy my affection with expensive food. And instead, Instead, I got to see you remember your mother. I got to meet someone who loved her almost as much as you did. I got to watch you take your first bite of chocolate souffle in 20 years. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I got to see your heart, William. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see her own reflection in his eyes. And what did you think of what you saw? I think you're dangerous. To who? To me. To every wall I've built to protect myself. She looked up at him, seeing her own desire reflected in his expression. I think you could break my heart without even trying. I would never. I know. That's what makes you dangerous. They stood there on the sidewalk, the city alive around them, but somehow distant. William lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing across her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. Joanne, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely insane. I don't do crazy. Neither do I. But when he leaned down and kissed her, soft and tentative and full of promise, Joanne realized that maybe it was time to start. Maybe the most dangerous thing wasn't falling in love. Maybe it was staying safe and missing out on everything that mattered. The kiss was everything she'd been afraid to want, gentle but passionate, careful but desperate, the kind of kiss that promised forever while asking for nothing but this moment. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, both stunned by the electricity that had passed between them. I should go, she whispered, but she made no move to step away. You should, he agreed, but his hands were still framing her face like she was something precious he couldn't bear to release. This changes everything. Yes, it does. Are you ready for everything to change? William smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. With you, I'm ready for anything. Chapter 5. The Heart's True Colors. Love is the only war where surrender feels like victory until someone reminds you that every battle has casualties. The most beautiful weeks of Joanne's life began with burnt pancakes and ended with her heart breaking in her own living room. 3 weeks of pure magic. That's what Joanne would remember later, when everything fell apart. 3 weeks of William picking her up from work with coffee and pastries from her favorite bakery. Weeks of long conversations that stretched late into the night, of discovering that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep, and that he'd secretly funded 12 art scholarships in his mother's name. Days of falling so completely, so recklessly in love that she forgot to be afraid. She should have remembered that fairy tales always have a villain. Joanne was in her small apartment, editing photos from a recent shoot, when her phone rang. William's name on the screen still made her heart skip, even after all their time together. Hey, she answered, not bothering to hide the smile in her voice. Joanne. His voice was different, strained, urgent, hollow in a way that made her stomach drop. I need to see you. Can I come over? Something cold settled in her chest like ice forming over water. What's wrong? Just, please. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead, leaving Joanne staring at her phone with a growing sense of dread. In 21 days, William had never sounded like that, distant, almost formal, scared in a way that reminded her too much of the man she'd first met at the wedding, before she'd seen past his walls to the wounded heart underneath. When he arrived, she knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. His usual warmth was replaced by a tension that radiated from his entire body like electricity before a storm. He kissed her forehead instead of her lips, and his hands shook slightly as he pulled away, not from passion, but from barely controlled panic. Sit down, he said quietly. Please. Joanne perched on the edge of her couch, every instinct screaming that she didn't want to hear what he was about to say. Brinley came to see me today, William began, his voice carefully controlled. "She has a proposition." "What kind of proposition?" William ran his hands through his hair. "Her father's company is about to announce a merger with Harrison Tech, the deal I've been working on for 6 months. If it goes through without Peto Industries, I'll lose the biggest contract of my career." Joanne felt the first crack in her heart. "And Brinley is offering to make sure I'm included. Full partnership, guaranteed profits for 5 years. In exchange for what?" William's silence was answer enough. "She wants you back," Joanne said hollowly. "She wants me to announce our engagement at the Harrison Tech Gala next month. A big public declaration that we're reuniting." William finally looked at her, pain devastating in his eyes. "She says it's about business stability, but we both know what it really is. Revenge. She wants to destroy us," William corrected quietly. Joanne felt like she was drowning in ice water. "What did you tell her?" "I told her no. I told her I'd rather lose everything than give up what we have." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by crushing guilt. "William, you can't lose your company because of me. It's not because of you, it's because of her, because she's a vindictive, manipulative. It doesn't matter why." Joanne stood, pacing to the window, because she needed distance from the pain in his eyes. "If you lose everything, you'll resent me eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but someday you'll look at me and remember what I cost you. That's not true, isn't it?" She turned to face him, tears threatening but not yet falling. "Your company is your life, William. It's how you honor your mother's memory, how you prove that her sacrifices meant something. It's your legacy, your foundation, your way of making the world better. I can't be the reason you lose that." William stood too, crossing to her in 2 quick strides, his hands reaching for her like she was a lifeline. "Joanne, listen to me." "No, you listen." Her voice was stronger now, fueled by the terrible certainty that she was about to break both their hearts to save his soul. "I've seen what happens when love gets mixed up with money and power. My father left my mother the moment supporting us became inconvenient. Your father abandoned your mother when his family disapproved. I won't be another casualty in someone else's war." "This is different." "Is it?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same. A man having to choose between love and everything else he values." William's face went pale as parchment. "You think I'd choose money over you? I think you'd choose your mother's legacy over a woman you've known for 21 days, and you'd be right to—" The words hit William like physical blows, and she could see each one land, could watch them tear something vital inside him. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Joanne wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces of her heart together long enough to finish this. "I understand that this was always going to end. I just thought we'd have more time." "Joanne, please, you should go." "No." William's voice was fierce suddenly, desperate in a way she'd never heard before. "I'm not walking away from this. From us. There has to be another solution." "There is." Joanne's voice was barely a whisper, each word cutting her throat like glass. "You marry her." "Absolutely not. It's just a business arrangement, right? That's what she's offering, a fake engagement for a real partnership. You get your deal, she gets her revenge fantasy, and everyone wins. Everyone except us." "There is no us, William." The lie tasted like poison, like everything bitter and wrong in the world. There was never going to be an us. We're from different worlds, and eventually that was going to matter. William stared at her like she'd struck him. "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" "Look around, William. Look at my apartment, my life. You're a billionaire who orders wine that costs more than my monthly salary. I take pictures for a living and shop at thrift stores. What did we think was going to happen? I thought we were going to fall in love and figure out the rest together. His honesty shattered what was left of her resolve. The simple truth of it, the genuine belief in his voice, made her want to take back every word she'd just said. But wanting something and being able to survive it were two different things. We did fall in love. That's the problem. William stepped closer, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. Then fight for it. Fight for us. I am fighting. I'm fighting to save you from making a mistake that could destroy everything you've worked for. You're not saving me. You're leaving me. Sometimes those are the same thing. For a moment, they stood frozen, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like a chasm too wide to cross. Then William's phone rang, shattering the silence like gunfire. He ignored it. It rang again. "Answer it," Joanne said quietly. With visible reluctance, William pulled out his phone. "It's Grayson." "Answer it, William." He did, his eyes never leaving her face. "What?" Even from across the room, Joanne could hear the urgency in his assistant's voice, could see William's expression grow increasingly grim as he listened. "I'll be right there," he said finally, ending the call. "What's wrong?" Harrison Tech just announced they're accelerating their timeline. The final decision on partnerships happens tomorrow, instead of next month. William's voice was hollow, defeated. "If I don't have an answer for Brindley by morning, I'm out." The universe, Joanne realized, had a cruel sense of timing. "Then you have your answer," she said. "Joanne, go, William. Go save your company. Go honor your mother's memory. Go be the man you need to be." "What if the man I need to be is the one who chooses you?" The question hung in the air like a prayer, like a plea, like a promise of everything they could have been if the world were different, if love were enough, if fairy tales were real. "Then you'd be making a mistake," Joanne whispered, "and I love you too much to let you make it." William looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face like he was trying to capture her in his mind, the way she captured moments with her camera. She could see him trying to find words, trying to find some argument that would change her mind, some solution that would save them both. But they both knew there wasn't one. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is." He walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, these 21 days were the happiest of my life. Mine, too." After he left, Joanne sank onto her couch and let herself cry, for the love they'd found, for the future they'd lost, for the impossible choice that had torn them apart. Outside her window, Chicago sparkled in the darkness. 8 million people going about their lives, unaware that her heart was breaking. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kinsley. "How's Prince Charming?" Joanne stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "He's gone." "Gone where?" "Back to his real life." What happened? Joanne set the phone aside without answering. How could she explain that sometimes love wasn't enough, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was let someone go even when it destroyed you, that sometimes saving someone meant sacrificing yourself? She walked to her bedroom and stared at her mother's painting, the lake at sunrise, full of hope and possibility. Her mother had believed in love, had trusted it even when it disappointed her. But her mother had also died alone, abandoned by the man who'd promised to love her forever. Joanne wouldn't make the same mistake, even if it killed her to make a different one, even if choosing to protect William from loss meant losing him herself, even if the price of his happiness was her own heart breaking into pieces too small to ever put back together. Chapter 6. When Shadows Dance. Sometimes the darkest moments are just God's way of teaching us that dawn is worth waiting for, even when we've forgotten how to believe in light. 2 months. 68 days since Joanne had walked out of her own heart and left it bleeding on her living room floor. She'd counted every one. The Morrison Gallery had become her sanctuary and her prison, a place where she could lose herself in work and pretend that the ache in her chest was just exhaustion. Her new series, Invisible Threads, featured portraits of people often overlooked by society: homeless veterans, elderly nursing home residents, immigrant workers. It was her most ambitious project yet, and Emerson had been thrilled when major art collectors started expressing interest. What Emerson didn't know was that Joanne had been pouring all her heartbreak into her lens, capturing the loneliness and resilience she saw in her subjects because it mirrored what she felt inside. Every photograph was a meditation on loss, on the courage it took to keep going when everything you loved had been stripped away. "You need to eat something that isn't coffee and regret," Kinsley said, appearing at Joanne's shoulder with a sandwich from the deli next door. "And sleep something that isn't 30-minute power naps at your desk. And possibly shower something because you're starting to look like one of your own portraits, beautiful but haunted." "I showered yesterday," Joanne protested, not looking up from the contact sheet she was reviewing. "That was 3 days ago, and dry shampoo doesn't count as personal hygiene." Joanne finally looked up to find her best friend studying her with the concerned expression she'd been wearing for weeks. Kinsley Reed had been Joanne's anchor since college, the free-spirited social worker who could talk anyone into anything and who'd never met a lost cause she couldn't champion. But even Kinsley's irrepressible optimism was being tested by Joanne's determined self-destruction. "I'm fine," Joanne said automatically. "You're a disaster. A beautiful, talented disaster who's wasting away because she's too stubborn to admit she made a mistake, but a disaster nonetheless." Kinsley perched on the edge of Joanne's desk. "When's the last time you went on a date? Or left this space after 8 p.m.? Or smiled for a reason that wasn't related to good lighting?" "I smile. Grimacing at bad camera angles doesn't count." Before Joanne could respond, the front door chimed. Both women looked up to see a man in an expensive suit walking toward them, tall, lean, with the kind of easy confidence that suggested he was used to commanding attention without demanding it. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent that immediately put Joanne on guard. "I'm looking for Joanne Jarmer." "That's me," Joanne said, standing warily. "Can I help you?" The man extended his hand with a smile that was probably meant to be charming, but only made her more suspicious. "Colton Hayes. I'm William's business partner and, I suppose, his closest friend." Joanne's heart stopped. She hadn't heard William's name spoken aloud in over 60 days, and hearing it now felt like touching a live wire, painful and electric and impossible to ignore. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," she said carefully. "Actually, we do, but not here." Colton glanced meaningfully at Kinsley, who was listening with barely concealed curiosity. "Could we perhaps go somewhere more private?" Every instinct told Joanne to refuse, to protect the fragile peace she'd built by avoiding anything connected to William. But something in Colton's expression, a combination of desperation and determination, made her hesitate. "5 minutes," she said finally. "There's a coffee shop next door." "I'll watch the space," Kinsley offered, clearly hoping to eavesdrop. "Take your time. Take all the time you need. Take 5 minutes," Joanne repeated firmly. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon. Colton bought them both coffee and led her to a corner table, his movements efficient and purposeful in a way that reminded her painfully of William. "How is he?" Joanne asked before she could stop herself. "Terrible," Colton said bluntly. "He's working 18-hour days, sleeping in his office and going through assistants like tissues. Yesterday he fired someone for bringing him the wrong brand of coffee." Joanne's chest tightened. "He saved his company, though. The Harrison Tech deal went through." "Oh, the deal went through. Peto Industries is more successful than ever, and he's more miserable than I've ever seen him." "What about Brinley?" Colton's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. What about her? Didn't they? Joanne couldn't bring herself to say the words, couldn't voice the question that had been tearing at her for months. Get engaged? Hell no. William told her exactly where she could shove her proposition, in terms that were creative, even for him. Colton leaned back in his chair. He chose you, Joanne. He walked away from the biggest deal of his career to choose you. The words hit Joanne like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. That's impossible. The deal went through. Because I found another way. Because I spent 3 days working every connection I had, calling in every favor. Because William was so determined not to lose you that he was willing to risk everything rather than betray what you meant to him. Joanne felt like she couldn't breathe. But the announcement, I saw it in the Tribune, Petto Industries, full partnership, happened because of you, not in spite of you, because you made him remember what was actually worth fighting for. Colton pulled out his phone and showed her a series of photos. William at various charity events, ribbon cuttings, business dinners, all in the past months. But in every picture, he looked hollow, like a man going through the motions of living without actually being alive. After you ended things, something broke in him, but it also clarified something. He started liquidating personal assets, restructuring the company, taking bigger risks. It was like he decided that if he couldn't have what mattered most, he might as well bet everything on what mattered second most. His mother's legacy. Exactly. And it worked. But Joanne... Colton's voice grew gentle. Success without someone to share it with is just expensive loneliness. Joanne stared at the photos, seeing the pain William was trying so hard to hide from the world. Why are you telling me this? Because he won't. Because he's too proud and too scared and too convinced that you were right to leave. Colton leaned forward again. And because I've known William for 15 years, and I've never seen him the way he was with you, not even with Brinley. How was he with me? Happy, real, like he'd finally figured out who he was supposed to be. Colton's expression softened. The man talks about you constantly, Joanne. Your photography, your laugh, the way you take your coffee with extra foam. He's got one of your photographs hanging in his office, the one of Miguel from your Essential Workers series. He bought that, anonymously, through 3 different intermediaries, for twice what it was listed for. Emerson probably thinks she has a mysterious new collector. Joanne felt tears threatening. Colton, I'm not asking you to take him back. I'm asking you to understand that the choice you made for him, the choice to protect his career over your relationship, it wasn't the choice he wanted. You decided what was best for him without asking him what he actually valued. The accusation stung because it was true. I was trying to save him from having to choose. You were trying to save yourself from being chosen. There's a difference. Before Joanne could respond, Colton's phone buzzed urgently. He glanced at it and frowned. I have to go. William doesn't know I'm here, and if he finds out... He stood, then paused. There's something else you should know. About the art programs he funds. What about them? It's not 12 scholarships. It's 47. And it's not just scholarships, it's full programs. Art therapy for kids in foster care, supplies for underfunded schools, grants for emerging artists. He's given away more money in his mother's name than most people make in a lifetime. Joanne felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble again. Why are you telling me this? Because you said he'd choose his mother's legacy over love. But here's the thing. You were part of that legacy. The programs he created, the risks he took, the man he became when he was with you, that was all honoring her memory. You didn't compete with his mother's legacy, Joanne. You became part of it. After Colton left, Joanne sat in the coffee shop for a long time, staring at her untouched latte and trying to process everything he'd told her. She'd spent over 2 months convincing herself that she'd done the right thing, that William was better off without her, that love couldn't survive the pressure of his world. But what if she'd been wrong? What if her fear of being abandoned had made her abandon him first? Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Hudson's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, big brother," she answered, grateful for the distraction. "Don't hey big brother me. I just talked to Kinsley and she's worried about you. Says you've been living like a hermit and looking like death warmed over. I'm fine." "Joe." Hudson's voice was gentle but firm. "What's going on? And don't tell me it's work stress, because I know the difference between your work stress face and your heartbreak face." Joanne found herself telling him everything about William, about the impossible choice, about the past months of trying to convince herself she'd done the right thing. "Jesus, Joe," Hudson said when she finished. "You found a guy who was willing to risk everything for you, and you dumped him to protect him from a choice he didn't want protection from." "I was trying to do the right thing." "No, you were trying to do the safe thing." Hudson's voice was knowing. "Joe, you can't keep running from love because Mom and Dad didn't work out. Not every man is Dad. What if this one does? What if it doesn't? What if you're walking away from the best thing that ever happened to you because you're too scared to believe you deserve it?" That evening, Joanne found herself standing in front of her mother's painting again, studying the way the light touched the water, the hope captured in those gentle brush strokes. Her mother had believed in love, even when it disappointed her. Her mother had created beauty even when her heart was breaking. Her mother had never stopped hoping for sunrise, even in her darkest hours. Maybe it was time for Joanne to start believing in dawn again, too. But first, she had to figure out if William would still be there when she finally found the courage to reach for the light. And more importantly, she had to decide if she was brave enough to try. Chapter 7. The Gallery of Second Chances. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's loving someone enough to face your demons and believing they might love you enough to fight them beside you. The email arrived at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, destroying Joanne's world in 47 words. "Ms. Jama, we regret to inform you that Meridian Holdings is withdrawing funding for the Invisible Threads exhibition due to concerns about market viability and potential reputation risks. The exhibition must close by Friday. We apologize for any inconvenience. Harrison Blake, Investment Director." Joanne stared at her laptop screen, reading the message repeatedly. Meridian Holdings had been enthusiastic just 2 weeks ago, calling it groundbreaking and exactly the kind of socially conscious art that resonates with modern collectors. Now, suddenly, it wasn't viable. Her phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Emerson's voice was strained and furious. "I've been on the phone all night," the owner said without preamble. "Someone got to them. This wasn't a business decision. This was sabotage." "What do you mean?" "Someone with serious influence made pointed calls. Meridian kept mentioning pressure from major stakeholders and concerns about association with controversial subjects." Emerson's voice was bitter. "But your work isn't controversial. Someone made it controversial." Joanne's blood ran cold. "You think someone sabotaged this deliberately?" "I think someone very powerful wanted to hurt you and found the most devastating way to do it." Emerson paused. "The question is, who did you cross badly enough to warrant this kind of retaliation?" But Joanne already knew. There was only one person with the resources and the motivation to destroy something this important to her. Only one person who would see crushing Joanne's dreams as the most exquisite revenge for William's rejection. Brinley Madison. By noon, the art world was buzzing with news of the sudden cancellation. Joanne's phone rang constantly. Other owners expressing sympathy but carefully distancing themselves, collectors withdrawing interest in her work, journalists asking for statements about the controversy that had apparently materialized overnight. What controversy? Joanne wanted to scream. The controversy of photographing people society preferred to ignore? The controversy of treating homeless veterans and undocumented workers like human beings worthy of artistic representation? But she knew it wasn't really about the art. It was about William. Kinsley found her at the space that afternoon, sitting on the floor surrounded by photographs she was packing into boxes with mechanical precision. "This is bullshit," Kinsley announced, settling down beside her friend. "Complete and utter bullshit." "It's business," Joanne said flatly, wrapping a portrait of an elderly man named Thomas who cleaned office buildings at night to support his grandchildren. "Sometimes these things just don't work out." "Don't give me that corporate speak. We both know this is personal." Joanne looked up from the photograph, seeing her own exhaustion reflected in Kinsley's concerned face. "Knowing doesn't change anything. The show is dead, my reputation is probably shot, and I can't prove any of it was deliberate. So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to pack up these photos, go home, and figure out how to start over. Again." "That's it? You're just giving up?" "I'm being realistic. I went up against someone with unlimited resources and lost. It happens." Kinsley was quiet for a moment, studying Joanne's face with the intensity of someone who'd known her for over a decade. "You know what I think? That I should fight back? That I should expose whoever did this? That I should—" "I think you're relieved." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Joanne's hands stilled on the photograph. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? Because this gives you the excuse you've been looking for to retreat back into your safe little world where you don't have to risk anything or anyone important to you. My career is hardly a safe retreat. Your career isn't what you're running from, and we both know it." Kinsley's voice was gentle but uncompromising. "You're running from him. You're running from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong about everything." Before Joanne could respond, the door opened. She looked up expecting to see another journalist or a collector coming to gawk at the aftermath, but instead saw the last person she'd expected. Adeline Petto, William's grandmother, stood in the doorway like a force of nature in a Chanel suit. Despite being in her 90s, she moved with the authority of someone who'd never met a problem she couldn't solve or a person she couldn't charm into submission. "Ms. Jama," the elderly woman said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet power that made people stop talking and pay attention. "I believe we need to talk." Kinsley took one look at the newcomer and immediately stood. "I'll just go get coffee. For a very long time, possibly in another state." After Kinsley left, Adeline approached with the measured steps of someone who'd learned to command attention without demanding it. She was smaller than Joanne had expected, but her presence filled the entire space. "I know who you are," Joanne said quietly. "And I know who you are. More importantly, I know what you mean to my grandson." Adeline's gaze swept over the packed photographs with the sharp assessment of someone who understood art, power, and the intersection of both. "I also know what happened here. Then you know there's nothing I can do about it." "On the contrary, there's everything you can do about it." Adeline picked up one of the packed photographs, a portrait of a young mother working 3 jobs to support her children. "This is extraordinary work, Ms. Jama. It deserves to be seen." "Deserving and happening are 2 different things." "Indeed they are, which is why I'm here to make sure they become the same thing." Adeline set the photograph down carefully. "I've spent the morning making some calls of my own. Meridian Holdings has suddenly reconsidered their position." Joanne felt her heart skip. "What?" It's amazing how quickly people's concerns about market viability disappear when they're reminded that certain other investors might find their sudden change of heart financially uncomfortable. You threatened them? I informed them. There's a difference. Adeline's smile was sharp as a blade but warm as sunlight. Your show will proceed as planned. In fact, you now have additional funding and 3 more venues interested in hosting traveling exhibitions. Joanne stared at the older woman, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Why would you do that? Because this work matters. Because these people deserve to have their stories told. And because the woman my grandson loves shouldn't be punished for existing. Mrs. Petto. But mostly, Adeline continued, because I wanted to meet the woman who made my William remember how to be human again. The words hit Joanne like a physical blow. I'm the reason he's miserable. You're the reason he's alive. Adeline's voice was fierce, passionate. Before you, William was brilliant and successful and completely empty, a shell of a man going through the motions of living. After you, he was brilliant and successful and full of purpose. The fact that he's currently brilliant and successful and heartbroken doesn't negate what you gave him. I hurt him. You terrified him. There's a difference. Adeline moved closer, studying Joanne with eyes that seemed to see everything, past, present, and future. Do you know what William was like as a child? Joanne shook her head. Careful, so careful. Even as a little boy, he learned early that loving people meant losing them, so he stopped letting himself love. He built walls so high that I worried he'd never find his way out from behind them. Adeline's expression softened with memory and love. Then he met you, and suddenly those walls didn't matter anymore. Suddenly he was willing to risk everything for something real. And I threw it back in his face. You got scared. You're human. The question is, what are you going to do now? Joanne looked around the space, at the photographs waiting to be unpacked, at the second chance she was being handed by this remarkable woman who had no reason to help her except love for her grandson. I don't know if he'll forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. There's only love to reclaim if you're brave enough. What if I'm not? What if I'm too damaged, too scared, too human? Adeline's laugh was warm, full of understanding. My dear girl, we're all damaged. We're all scared. The trick is finding someone whose damage fits with yours, whose fears make sense alongside your own. And if William has moved on, then you'll know you tried. But Joanne, Adeline reached out and took her hand. He hasn't moved on. He's waiting. He's been waiting for over 2 months for you to realize what I figured out the moment I heard about you. What's that? That you're not the woman who's going to break his heart. You're the woman who's going to teach him it was worth risking in the first place. That evening, as Joanne carefully unpacked her photographs and began preparing for a show that was back from the dead, she found herself thinking about second chances and the courage it took to believe in them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emerson. Opening night is back on for Friday. And Joe, I think there's someone you should invite. Joanne stared at the message for a long time, her finger hovering over William's contact information. She'd kept his number all this time, though she'd never been brave enough to use it. Maybe it was time to start. But first, she had a show to save. And maybe, if she was very lucky and very brave, a love to reclaim. The question was, did she have the courage to reach for both? Chapter 8. Storm Before the Dawn. Love is not for the faint of heart. It requires warriors willing to storm the gates of their own fear and surrender everything for the chance to find home in another person's soul. The opening night of Invisible Threads was everything Joanne had dreamed it would be, and nothing like she'd expected it to feel. The Morrison Gallery hummed with energy as collectors, critics, and art lovers moved between the photographs, their voices hushed with reverence. Each portrait seemed to glow under the carefully placed lighting, and Joanne watched with professional satisfaction as viewers lingered, truly seeing the subjects she'd captured with such painstaking care. But despite the red dots appearing next to sold pieces, despite the whispered conversations about important work and necessary art, despite the critical success surrounding her like expensive perfume, Joanne felt hollow. Every few minutes her eyes swept the crowd, searching for a familiar face that wasn't there. William hadn't come. She'd sent the invitation 5 days ago, a simple card with the details and a handwritten note that had taken her 47 attempts to get right. "I'd like you to see what you helped inspire. These people deserve to be seen, and you taught me what that means." J. No response. No acknowledgement. Nothing. "Stop staring at the entrance," Kinsley said, appearing at her elbow with a glass of wine and the kind of gentle firmness that came from years of friendship. "He'll either come or he won't. Watching the door like a hawk isn't going to change that. I'm not, you are. You've been checking that entrance every 30 seconds for the past hour." Kinsley's voice was patient but uncompromising. "Joe, even if he doesn't show up tonight, this exhibition is incredible. These people matter. This work matters. You matter." Joanne knew her friend was right. The show was a triumph, regardless of William's absence. But knowing that didn't ease the ache in her chest or the growing certainty that she'd waited too long, hurt him too deeply for forgiveness. "Ms. Jarmer?" A voice behind her made her turn. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a press badge smiled nervously. "I'm Sarah Chen from the Tribune. Could I ask you a few questions about the exhibition?" "Of course." As Joanne answered questions about her artistic process and the inspiration behind the portraits, she tried to focus on the moment, on the success she'd worked so hard to achieve, but part of her remained focused on the entrance, hoping against hope that every opening of the door might bring him back to her. "One final question," Sarah said. "There are rumors that this exhibition almost didn't happen, that funding was withdrawn and then mysteriously restored. Can you comment on that?" Joanne hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the sabotage, about Adeline's intervention, about the web of love and revenge that had nearly destroyed everything. Sometimes art faces challenges. What matters is that these stories are being told. And the rumor that a prominent business figure was involved in both the sabotage and the rescue. Before Joanne could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. The crowd was parting like the Red Sea, murmurs rippling through the room like a stone dropped in still water. And there, standing in the doorway like he owned the world and everyone in it, was William. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Joanne's monthly rent, and his presence commanded attention from everyone in the room without him having to say a word. But his eyes were focused on only one thing, her. The intensity of his gaze was like a physical touch, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. "Excuse me," Joanne said to Sarah, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it echoing off the walls. William moved through the crowd with purpose, nodding politely to people who tried to catch his attention, but never stopping, never wavering from his path toward her. The months apart had changed him. He was leaner, sharper somehow, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of settled determination that made her pulse race. When he finally reached her, they stood for a moment in silence, the noise of the opening fading to background static as the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Your work is extraordinary," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral, but carrying undercurrents she couldn't quite read. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't." The honesty in his admission made her breath catch. What changed your mind? Curiosity, I suppose. I wanted to see what was worth destroying my company for. The words could have been cruel, but his tone was thoughtful, almost wondering. I wanted to see what you'd created from all that pain. Joanne felt her chest tighten. William, don't. His voice was quiet but firm, stopping her before she could launch into the apology she'd been rehearsing for days. Don't apologize. Don't explain. You made your choice over 2 months ago. I respect that choice, even if I don't understand it. The words hit like a slap, but she forced herself to stand her ground. It wasn't that simple. Wasn't it? William stepped closer, and she could see the months of pain etched in the lines around his eyes, the weight he'd lost, the careful control he was exerting over every word. You decided I wasn't worth the risk. You decided my feelings didn't matter as much as your fear. That seems fairly simple to me. That's not what happened. Then tell me what did happen. Tell me how the woman who stood up to Brinley to defend a stranger could turn around and abandon that same man when things got complicated. The accusation was fair and devastating. Around them, the opening continued, but Joanne felt like they were alone in a bubble of hurt and longing and words that should have been said months ago. I was trying to protect you, she said quietly. From what? From choosing for myself? From deciding what mattered to me? His voice rose slightly before he caught himself, lowering it again with visible effort. I didn't need protection, Joanne. I needed trust. From choosing wrong. From losing everything because of me. William laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter recognition. And what exactly do you think I lost? My company? I still have it. My money? I have more than ever. My reputation? Intact. The only thing I lost was you, and that was your choice, not mine. Before Joanne could respond, another voice cut through their conversation. How touching. True love conquers all, does it? They both turned to see Brinley Madison standing nearby, elegant in designer everything and radiating malicious satisfaction. Brinley, William said, his voice instantly cold. I wasn't aware you were interested in art. Oh, I'm interested in many things, William, especially things that don't belong to me. Her smile was razor-sharp, calculated to wound. Though I have to say I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd learned your lesson about associating with certain types of people. Certain types. Joanne stepped forward, fury overriding her heartbreak. You mean artists, working people, anyone who doesn't move in your rarefied social circle? I mean people who don't understand the responsibilities that come with real wealth and power, Brinley replied smoothly. People who think love is more important than legacy. Who have actual souls, Joanne interrupted, who care about something other than money and status. Brinley's composure slipped slightly. Careful, dear. Your jealousy is showing. My jealousy? Joanne laughed. Of what? Your complete inability to hold on to a man who sees through your facade. Ladies, William said, his voice carrying a warning that neither woman heeded. But Brinley wasn't finished. At least I never ran away the moment things got difficult. At least I fought for what I wanted, instead of playing the martyr. The accusation hit its mark like an arrow finding its target. Joanne felt the truth of it like a knife between her ribs, sharp and clean and undeniable. You're right, she said quietly, and both William and Brinley looked surprised at the admission. I did run away. I did choose fear over fighting. But you know what the difference is between us? Enlighten me. I ran away to protect the man I love. You manipulated and sabotaged to possess someone who doesn't love you back. Joanne stepped closer to Brinley, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than shouting. And deep down, in whatever's left of your heart, you know that no amount of money or power will ever make you the woman he chooses when he's free to choose anyone. Brinley's face flushed with rage, her careful composure finally cracking completely. "You think you've won something? You think this little art show makes you worthy of him? You're nobody, Joanne Jarmer, a photographer from nowhere with delusions of grandeur." "You're right again," Joanne said, surprising everyone, including herself. "I am nobody special. I don't have billions of dollars or social connections or a trust fund. All I have is a camera, a stubborn heart, and the love of a man who sees me for exactly who I am." She turned to William, her heart hammering, but her voice steady as bedrock. "I was wrong, William. I was wrong to choose for you, wrong to run away, wrong to let fear make my decisions. I love you. Not your money, not your success, not your empire. I love the man who talks to goldfish and remembers his mother's laugh and learns languages to understand hearts." William stared at her, and for a moment she saw something flicker in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or longing, or the ghost of what they'd once been to each other. "Joanne, I'm not finished." She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of blue in his storm-colored eyes, close enough to smell his cologne and remember what it felt like to be held by him. "I love the man who was willing to lose everything to choose me, even when I was too scared to let him. I love you enough to fight for us this time, if you'll let me, if it's not too late." The room had gone quiet around them. Everyone was listening now, witnessing this public declaration of love and fear and hope, this moment when two hearts either found their way back to each other or said goodbye forever. William looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced at Brinley, who was watching with barely concealed fury and growing alarm. "It's too late," he said quietly. The words shattered Joanne's heart all over again, but before she could respond, before she could process the finality of it, William continued. "It's too late for fear, too late for pride, too late for anything except this." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had started falling. "It's too late for me to pretend I don't love you more than my next breath. Too late to protect myself from the possibility that you might run again. Too late for anything except forever." And then he kissed her, right there in the middle of her exhibition, in front of everyone. He kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, like she was home and he'd been lost at sea. When they finally broke apart, the room erupted in applause. Brinley had disappeared, and Joanne found herself laughing through her tears. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," he whispered back, "forever and always, and even when you're being impossibly stubborn." "Is that a proposal?" "Not yet, but soon." He smiled, the real smile that transformed his entire face and reminded her why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Very, very soon. As the crowd gradually returned to viewing the portraits, William and Joanne stood together among the faces of invisible people who'd been given voice through her lens, both of them finally visible to each other in all their flawed, fearful, magnificent humanity. The storm was over. Dawn was breaking. And they were home. Chapter 9. Love's Perfect Storm. True love doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be brave enough to be perfectly yourself, scars and all, in the presence of someone who sees your flaws as just another reason to stay. The scent of burning pancakes and creative cursing drifted from William's kitchen on a Saturday morning in January, 6 months after they'd found their way back to each other. Joanne smiled before opening her eyes, stretching in the bed that had somehow become theirs. Living together had happened gradually. First, a toothbrush at his penthouse, then a drawer for her clothes. Before she knew it, her entire life had migrated uptown. "Need help?" she called out, pulling on one of his shirts and padding toward the kitchen. "I had this under control until Warren started giving me his morning wisdom." William said, gesturing toward the fishbowl where Warren Buffett II swam in lazy circles. You named another goldfish Warren Buffett? Warren Buffett Jr. died of old age. This is Warren Buffett II. He's showing even more promise than his predecessor. Very wise about market trends. Joanne laughed, wrapping her arms around his waist. You're completely insane. Insanely in love with you, he replied, turning in her arms. Good morning, beautiful. Good morning, terrible cook. David called, William said, scraping ruined pancakes into the trash. He wants to cater our engagement party. We're having an engagement party? William went very still. We're having an engagement if you say yes. Joanne's heart stopped. Actually stopped. She was sure of it because the world went silent, except for the sound of her pulse thundering in her ears. William! He reached into the drawer beside the stove and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly. I know this isn't romantic, he said, voice unsteady. I know I'm standing here half naked with burnt pancakes and a goldfish as my witness, but I can't wait anymore, Joanne. I can't spend another day without knowing you'll be mine forever. The ring was simple and stunning, a solitaire diamond that caught the morning light. But more beautiful was the expression on William's face, vulnerable and hopeful, and so full of love, it took her breath away. Joanne Jarmer, he said, dropping to one knee on the kitchen floor, will you marry me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives? Will you help me be the man your love makes me want to be? Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. The ring slid onto her finger perfectly. William stood and kissed her, spinning her around the kitchen while Warren Buffett II watched approvingly. I love you, William murmured against her lips. I love you too. But we're definitely ordering takeout for breakfast. Deal. But their peaceful morning was interrupted by William's phone buzzing insistently on the counter. Grayson's name appeared on the screen, and William frowned. It's Saturday, he said, as if his assistant might have forgotten. Answer it, Joanne said, recognizing the look of someone whose work never truly stopped. It might be important. William sighed and picked up the phone. This better be life or death, Grayson. Joanne could hear the urgency in his assistant's voice, even from across the kitchen, could see William's expression growing increasingly serious as he listened. When? William asked sharply. How bad? No, don't do anything until I get there. I'll be in the office in an hour. He hung up and ran his hands through his hair, that gesture of stress she'd learned to recognize. What's wrong? Joanne asked. There's been a data breach at one of our partner companies. It could affect millions of users, including ours. I have to... Go, Joanne said immediately. Handle it. I'll be here when you get back. William looked torn, glancing between his phone and her face. But we just got engaged. We should be celebrating, planning. We have the rest of our lives to celebrate, she said, reaching up to cup his face. Right now, people need you to fix this. Go be the brilliant CEO I fell in love with. He kissed her hard, grateful and desperate. I don't deserve you. Lucky for you, love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing each other every day, even when one of you has to leave to save the digital world. 6 hours later, William returned to find Joanne curled up on the couch with her laptop, editing photos while Warren Buffett II provided silent commentary. How bad was it? She asked, looking up from her screen. Bad, but contained. We'll have to do a full security overhaul, rebuild some systems from scratch, but we caught it before any actual user data was compromised. He collapsed next to her on the couch, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. I'm sorry. Our engagement day, and I spent it dealing with corporate disasters. Our engagement day, Joanne corrected, closing her laptop and curling up against his side. And you spent it protecting people. That's exactly the kind of man I want to marry. William was quiet for a long moment, his arms tightening around her. Sometimes I worry that this life, the demands, the crises, the way work can consume everything, isn't fair to you. William, she pulled back to look at him directly. Do you remember what you told me the night we met? About speaking someone's language being the first step to understanding their heart. He nodded. I understand your language now. I understand that protecting your company isn't about money or power. It's about honoring your mother, taking care of the people who depend on you, building something that matters. I'm not marrying William Petto the billionaire. I'm marrying William Petto, the man who talks to goldfish and burns pancakes and carries the weight of other people's livelihoods on his shoulders because that's who he is. And you're okay with that? With the crazy hours and the constant pressure and the fact that sometimes the world will demand I choose between you and everything else? Joanne smiled, thinking of all the times she'd watched him agonize over decisions, all the late nights she'd fallen asleep to the sound of him on conference calls with international partners, all the moments she'd seen him put other people's needs before his own. I'm okay with it, because you'll never have to choose. I'll be right there beside you every step of the way. That's what partners do. The engagement party David catered was elegant and intimate, held in the garden of Adeline's estate 2 weeks later. The guest list was small but meaningful: family, close friends, and the people who'd helped them find their way back to each other. Joanne wore a flowing blue dress that made her feel like she was floating, and William couldn't seem to stop touching her. Her hand, her back, her cheek, like he needed the constant contact to believe this was real. You clean up nice, little sister, Hudson said, appearing at her elbow with champagne. He'd driven down from Milwaukee with his wife and their 2 young daughters, and Joanne was grateful to have her anchor there. Thanks. I'm still getting used to all this. She gestured at the elaborate garden, the string quartet, the staff circulating with hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per bite than she used to spend on groceries. The fancy stuff or the happiness? Both, but mostly the happiness. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Hudson studied her face with the practiced eye of someone who'd been watching out for her since childhood. You look different, settled, like you finally figured out where you belong. I belong with him, Joanne said simply. Everything else is just details. Even the 8-figure bank account and the penthouse lifestyle. Especially those. I didn't fall in love with his money, Hudson. I fell in love with the man who reads poetry when he can't sleep and cries during animated movies. He cries during animated movies? Like a baby. We watched Coco last week, and he sobbed through the entire ending. Something about family and memory and honoring the people we've lost. Hudson laughed. Maybe he's not so intimidating after all. Across the garden, William was deep in conversation with Colton and Adeline, but his eyes kept finding Joanne, like he was checking to make sure she was still there, still real, still his. When their gazes met, he smiled. That soft, private smile that was just for her, and she felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst from pure happiness. Ladies and gentlemen, Adeline's voice carried across the garden as she stood to make a toast, commanding attention simply by existing. If I could have your attention, please. The crowd quieted, all eyes turning to the elegant woman who'd lived through nearly a century of history and had the wisdom to show for it. When my grandson was a little boy, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air, he used to ask me if his mother was happy in heaven. I never knew how to answer that question, because how do you explain to a child that happiness isn't a destination? It's a choice, a practice, a daily decision to find joy despite pain. Joanne felt William's hand tighten around hers, could see the emotion in his eyes even from across the garden. But watching William with Joanne, seeing the man he becomes when he's with her, I finally know what to tell that little boy. Adeline's eyes found theirs across the space. His mother is happy because her son learned to choose love over fear, joy over safety, and connection over control. Isabella would be so proud of the man you've become, William, and of the woman who helped you remember how to be him. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden as everyone raised their glasses, and Joanne felt the presence of the woman she'd never met, but who'd shaped the man she loved. To William and Joanne, Adeline continued, may your love be a beacon for all of us who've forgotten that the greatest risk is not taking any risks at all. Later, after the guests had gone home and the staff had cleaned up, William and Joanne found themselves alone on the terrace under a canopy of stars, swaying to music only they could hear. Regrets? William asked softly, pulling her close. About what? About saying yes to all this craziness? About agreeing to marry a man who talks to fish and burns breakfast and has panic attacks about data breaches? Joanne considered the question seriously, thinking about the journey that had brought them here, the fear, the mistakes, the months of heartbreak that had nearly destroyed them both. My only regret is that we lost those months, that I let fear steal time we could have spent being this happy. We have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time. Is that a promise? It's a guarantee. They danced together in the moonlight. No music except